All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel, and we try to turn you on to great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories that you can base your whole life upon. Grand unified theories, cosmologies, cosmogonies, and magnum opuses and tour de forces, and things that you can, trust, mainly because of the level of dedication involved, usually as a person or people who spent their whole life putting something together, never really got any credit, never got any publicity, never got any money, but did it because of the principle of the thing and to, for the sake of posterity. But now, many of these theories are in the endangered species category. They're threatening to become extinct and thrown on the scrap heap of history. And so we're trying to, I've found value in these things, and I'm trying to share them, put them out there, get them resuscitated and back into the cultural conversations. Today is our 174th video called, in the unit called the Reciprocal Church. This is where we're taking various works that inject a little bit of a spiritual or religious vibe, methods, practices that you can use in your own life to better understand the divine, however, the creator, however you conceptualize it. These different people have conceptualized it in different ways. And I find this to be important because I believe that all of our Western religions are about to collapse under the weight of the evidence or lack thereof. And we're going to go through some of that also, show the need for these texts. In particular, right now, we're in the stages of doing a decode on the New Testament. Right now, we're just kind of bopping around, showing a few different what you call ciphers, ways to decode a text, in particular the New Testament. And eventually we're going to look at what we call, what the author Joseph Atwill calls the Flavian signature. And then we're going to look at another Flavian signature, which goes beyond even what Joseph Atwill envisioned. And the Flavians, as you may know, are a dynasty of Caesars. The Flavian dynasty includes Emperor Vespasian, Emperor Titus, his son, and Emperor Domitian, his other son. And they ruled as Caesars in Rome from 69 to 96 AD. They were hard-bitten because both Titus and Vespasian were military generals, and they were occupied in the War of the Jews that lasted from 66 to 73 AD. Vespasian fought the first 3 years, and then eventually Nero killed himself, Emperor Nero, and he was replaced by a series of 3 separate emperors, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. And eventually Vespasian became the emperor. He appointed his son Titus to be the new military general of this war against the Jewish rebellion there in Palestine. The Romans had taken over Palestine in 63 BC or so, and so they were the colonial custodians of that territory. But the Jews didn't like it, even though the Romans were quite tolerant as far as letting other people practice their own religions. They were not so tolerant about allowing people not to practice their religion. They insisted on putting statues of Caesar around, and you know how the Jews are with those graven images. They don't like that, and they're willing to die. Many of them were willing to die for it. There were a number of other episodes in the kind of increasing boil of Jewish revolt that you know, goes all the way back to the Maccabees, really in the mid-second century BC. They threw off the Greeks, and then eventually the Romans came in. So the Maccabees were in control for about 100 plus years, but eventually the Romans kind of took over, I think under Mark Antony, and then he brought in the Herods. The Herods were basically a dynasty of puppet Jews. They weren't even Jews, but I think Herod converted to Judaism at a certain point. But they were actually Idumeans, which is kind of a little bit south of Palestine in Arabia. And so the Herods were generally pretty much hated. And that was another kind of, you know, straw on the camel's back, so to speak, that eventually, you know, collapsed with the rebellion in 66 AD. And the Romans were very tired of the Jews being a thorn in their side. The Romans had this giant empire, and most of the other nations were not as troublesome as the Jews were, especially with the advanced techniques that the Romans used between brute force and propaganda, you know, and assuasion. They, you know, pretty much kept a lot of other groups calm while the Jews were smoldering like this. And as a result, and it had been talked about for generations, and it probably was done on a smaller scale much before Vespasian, but eventually they decided to write these Gospels, and the goal was to basically to pacify the Jews. Not just the Jews in Palestine, but the Jews all over the diaspora. There were probably like hundreds of thousands of Jews in Alexandria, Egypt, which was the second biggest city in the Roman Empire. There were Jews in Rome. There were Jews all over Asia Minor, Persia, or Iran. Asia Minor is Turkey. You know, they were all over the, that's why, at least according to Atwell and some of the other authors, why the Gospels were written in Greek, which brings up, you know, all kinds of translation problems. Jesus and his disciples are speaking in Aramaic, but the Gospels are written in Greek. You know, you have a problem right there from the start. As far as, you know, accuracy is concerned. But that's something that we'll probably get into at a different time. So so that's kind of Atwill's focus, where he demonstrates how the Romans wrote the Gospels. And we'll get into that in depth. Today we're looking again at what I call the Dead Sea Scrolls cipher. And the Dead Sea Scrolls were a big find in the 20th century. Starting in about 1947, Bedouin found some books in vases that looked really old, and eventually a few of them filtered into antiquities dealers, and they eventually, a couple of them got looked at, and they figured out that they were authentic, or at least that's what they tell us. And it took them forever to translate them and disseminate them. It wasn't really until the early 1990s that all of these documents were out there, but several of them were out there before. It wasn't like they had absolutely nothing to work with, but what's interesting about the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's really like, we'll go over it, but there are really like 800 different books, including every book from the Old Testament. And they were discovered in Qumran, which is about 20 miles from Jerusalem, in kind of on the border of Palestine and what was called Transjordan. Before the establishment of Israel. At least the first ones were discovered before the establishment of Israel. And an international team of so-called scholars, who were mainly Roman Catholic priests, were appointed to figure out what these things said, catalog them, and put them out there for other scholars to dig in, and the lay public. But as they were doing that, I believe they saw something they didn't like. They saw a lot of things that contradicted their belief system, I believe, and might have even embarrassed them. And so they just started to stall and started to, deflect. They started to put out books on relatively irrelevant aspects of the scrolls, and not translating the more explosive stuff. And like I said, this took like 40 years, and not until the early 90s were these documents kind of out there. And by that time, a lot of the scholars who were very enthusiastic about that, by that time they were dead, or infirm, or retired. So the new generation didn't really probably understand the context, and I think that the Dead Sea Scrolls are pretty much not understood by the vast majority of Christians, for sure, and but scholars even. And I mean, not like I understand them. I just have the historical context. I'm going to start digging into them, but there's it's quite voluminous. But anyway, what's important about the Dead Sea Scrolls is not so much all of the biblical texts, because those are virtually identical to the ones that we already know, but it's the sectarian material, the material that is out there, written specifically from the viewpoint of the sect that lived there in Qumran, and they were like very strict Jews who believed certain things, and they wrote down what they believed. They had rituals and procedures and rules. They wrote all those down. They wrote down their story, and these things are bear an uncanny resemblance to much of the stuff that's in the New Testament. And there's not a whole lot of explanation for that. And so Barbara Thiering, a scholar from Australia, I believe, she put out a book called Jesus the Man, where she explains, she basically takes all of the miracles and the miraculous stuff and the, supernatural stuff that's in the New Testament, and she finds a logical explanation for it from the language that's used in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We've gone over some of this, but we'll keep going right now. Okay, so some of the parallels that she's talking about between the gospel group, the disciples and the whole movement, and the Qumran sect. They both lived in expectation of a new Jerusalem with an identical architectural plan, 4 square, like a square, with 3 gates on each side for the 12 tribes. So the main building at Qumran was kind of like a scaled down model of the city of Jerusalem. She does say that the tone of the New Testament is much softer than the tone of the Dead Sea Scrolls, except for the book of Revelation. And she says, except for the book of Revelation, which would have been very much at home at Qumran. Both of the groups believed that they alone held the truth in their view. She talks about all the raisings of the dead that occur in the New Testament. That kind of thing doesn't really happen in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It does happen, but there are explanations. Like, so in the Dead Sea Scrolls, according to Thiering's work, Jesus survives the crucifixion. The 3 men who were put up to be crucified there, which included Judas and a patsy, I believe, somebody who was supposed to be Simon the Magi, or the Samaritan magician. They were all basically convicted because they I'm not quite clear exactly why they were convicted, but they were saved. Basically, James, the brother of Jesus, was also known as Joseph of Arimathea. He got them down, and as Thiering points out, at least according to other scholars, ancient scholars, crucifixion is a long-term deal. Like, Jesus was only up on the cross, and it may not even be a cross. It may just be a pole. But that he was only up there for like half a day. Crucifixion usually takes several days in order to actually kill somebody, apparently. She says that, they keep your weight. You're not putting all your weight on your upper body. Your weight is being held up on the pole. And so it's not like this excruciating, yes, you get your hands nailed or whatever and all that. It's not, by no means is it a picnic, but it is a slower process. And so when Joseph of Arimathea was able to kind of like talk the Roman authority into taking these people down, Jesus was still alive. He had been poisoned. The other 2 had had their legs broken, but they didn't break Jesus's legs. And part of that goes, Joseph Atwill would say that goes right to Exodus 12, that is because Jesus is the Passover lamb, and you're never supposed to break the legs of the Passover lamb. So anyway, according to Thiering, and she says according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jesus survived the crucifixion. So he wasn't raised from the dead. He was basically saved and brought down and was able to recover over the course of a long period of recovery. She uses this thing called the Pesher technique, which is a Jewish thing where they kind of it's kind of like a code where you have to kind of know the Jewish scriptures inside and out, and they'll cite a story which brings up, which refers to another story from the Old Testament, and you kind of have to know the story very well, and then that puts you into the context of what they're talking about. So it's a coded way of communicating, and I think that she does great work in terms of you know, breaking down some of these codes, but I do think that she goes a little bit overboard, you know, seeing codes like everywhere, because you know, you have to be able to communicate in some way or another. Like, so for example, she says that if you get sick, if you're getting sick, that as a priest, that means that you're about to be excommunicated. You're in the process of being excommunicated. And when you are excommunicated, that means that then the code is that you are executed. And that you, apparently the real process of excommunication is they made you lay in a coffin for 4 days. But it's kind of like, well, what kind of language do you use if the priest actually does get sick? I mean, you know, that's a pretty common thing, and it seems like it's less believable to believe that getting sick is being excommunicated than it is just being sick. It's so. I have my doubts, but, you know, certainly she's given me enough so that I'm going to start studying some of these Dead Sea Scrolls and seeing for myself. And that's the main point of what I'm getting at here in general is, you know, I'm trying to give you some of the codes so that you can look at these texts for yourself and figure out what you think. Now, what I would suggest as far as if you're a Christian, you know, you can't use the Bible. It's like circular reasoning. You have to use other texts as well as the Bible. And that's how kind of the beauty of Atwill's work is that you use the New Testament, but you also use Josephus's writings, and especially his book, The War of the Jews, written about the same time as the Gospels. And you can see that they're running parallel to each other. And they're bringing up many of the same points, and there's so many different parallels in it that it kind of boggles the mind. We'll be going over it. But you know, get a copy. There's plenty of copies of Josephus online for free. Get a copy of Josephus and read it for yourself, especially, you know, read the New Testament kind of alongside it. Have both open right there, and, you know, when you read something in Josephus that rings a bell, try to find it in the Bible, and vice versa. Well, most likely you know the New Testament much better, so read what you don't know as well and see how many, you know, parallels you can find. I'll give you an example of another parallel. I'd like to at least give one of these from Atwill's parallels, you know, every time. And this one is, you know, the crucifixion again. You know, you have Jesus up there in the middle with the two thieves on each side, so-called, and Joseph of Arimathea brings them down and gives Jesus a tomb, puts him in a tomb. Well, there's an episode in War of the Jews. Now, Josephus is a Jew, and he's the general of the Jewish army in fighting this war against the Romans, 66 to 73 A.D. He eventually surrenders to Vespasian and defects. He he has something in his mind where he said, it seems clear to me that God has changed his favor. He now is no longer a supporter of Israel. He's a supporter of Rome. And he gives Vespasian the star prophecy, saying that you are going to become the emperor. And when he does, Josephus is honored by Vespasian adopting him as his son and bringing him to Rome to become a part of the court, court of the king. But at the end of the War of the Jews, or I don't think it's at the end, Josephus is traveling, and he sees 3 men being crucified, and he recognizes one of them. It's possible he recognizes all 3, but he definitely at least recognizes one of them as being one of his fellow Jews. Josephus was a Jewish priest before he became a general, which, I guess you can believe that, but altogether, I don't currently believe that Josephus actually existed either. But according to the story, he convinces, because he's been captured by the Romans, and I believe he convinces Vespasian or Vespasian's men to stop, and he convinces them that he gives him permission to take these 3 Jews down from the crosses, and turns out that 2 of them are already dead, and but one of them is saved. Now Josephus says in the story that I believe that his father was named Matthias, and so in Hebrew, they use the word bar, B-A-R, to signify son of, Simon Bar Jonas, Simon the son of Jonas. Well, so Josephus is Joseph Bar Matthias. So in the New Testament, you have Joseph of Arimathea, and in War of the Jews, you have Joseph Bar Mathia. And in both stories, Joseph takes 3 people down from the cross, and 2 of them are dead, and he saves the other one. So, it's like there's literally hundreds of parallels like that between the War of the Jews and the Gospels. But some of them cut the other way as well, where it's like the people that wrote the Gospels couldn't have possibly known. So what the Romans did is they backdated it by 40 years. They were writing in the 70s. Well, so did the writers of the Gospels. They backdated everything by 40 years. And so all of Jesus's prophecies are fulfilled by Titus, the second general. Anyway, back to Barbara Thiering, some of her codes. She says the word loaves stood for Levites or Levites, the priests, the Jewish priest class, which is actually the 3rd level of the priest class. Above them is the Zadokites, and then I can't remember the other one. But the Levites distributed 12 loaves because there's 2 steps of initiation for the Dead Sea Scrolls crowd. They have baptism, which, is supposed to be a Christian thing. And then they also have communion. So the first one is baptism, and then the deeper level is communion. And so the part of the communion are these loaves, the 12 loaves that they give out. They give out the 12 loaves to the high priests, and they give out 7 loaves to the lower category. These Jews saw a new covenant or religious contract, not the old covenant to which all sons of Abraham belong by birth, but a covenant of personal choice and initiation, following the law. But it was no longer closed off to Jews. A new Israel. Many of the teachings did come from, within the Judaism spectrum. Apparently, Hillel, one of the founders of, I guess, rabbinical Judaism from early first century, Thiering says that he's the one who came up with the idea of the golden rule. And then she talks about this guy Menachem, and that's he was a diaspora Essene, and so the Essenes were a very strict group of Jews that a lot of scholars say Jesus was an Essene, and the Essenes seem to be at least somewhat consistent with many of the ideas of the Dead Sea Scrolls crowd, although the Dead Sea Scrolls crowd seems to be a little bit more militant. But the Essenes, but they're also those are the Palestinian Essenes, but the diaspora Essenes were a little bit softer than that. And apparently, according to the Palestinian Essenes, the diaspora kind were what they called seekers after smooth things. So they were, kind of more urbanized, Hellenized, and it also says here that Menachem saw Herod at one point and prophesied that Herod would become king. That's, again, the star prophecy. The star prophecy is only for Jews, by the way, but it's been used 3 times in this first century. But Menachem, Josephus, and Yohanan ben Zakkai, the founder of rabbinical Judaism. So maybe we'll start there tomorrow. I'm sorry for the disjointed nature of this, but this is a sprawling topic, and I figure I'll get around to talking about everything after a few more videos. Thanks for tuning in today. Come back tomorrow.